but I am just stuffed up. And so water is just to kind of make sure that my throat is lubricated a little bit here. Many of you know that I've never been much of a musician. I think my singing voice makes that pretty obvious. Just ask my family. No, actually, I think the better people to ask would be those that run the sound booth, because they're the saints that make sure that my microphone is off whenever we sing, so you don't have to listen to it. However, I do appreciate children's ministry, and a strong children's ministry. And so when I come across something that has to do with music and has to do with children, I make note. I'm going to share with you a list of definitions that comes from an elementary school music test. Here is what some of our little children have written about when it comes to music. Handel was half German, half Italian, and half English. He was rather large. Music sung by two people at the same time is called a duel. Morris dancing is a country survival from the time when people were happy. The only fugue I can think of is the one between the Hatfields and the McCoys. That makes sense. A family singing group is a mother and father with brothers and sisters optional. A dirge is a piece of music written to be played at sad occasions such as funerals, weddings, and so forth. Gregory of the Gregorian chant lived from 540 to 604, but I can't remember whether it was AC or DC. Music touches our soul. We feel it. We are moved by it. We tap our feet, our hands, or even our head to it. Now, when I was in college, I had a roommate that was a true headbanger. Man, you put on some Alice in Chains or some Metallica, and I'll tell you what, he had the hair, and he would just go headbanging. Now, I've learned when I try to headbang, I usually get a headache, and it's also a reminder that I'm not 20 years younger. I would also say that our moods go along with music. I had another roommate in college that was a bit bipolar. And the music that he would choose in the morning as he got ready really illustrated this. We would see him, he would choose something that was upbeat, that was fast going. And I'm telling you, when I say literally he was bouncing off the wall, he was. He would be jumping back and forth. But there were other times he would wake up and he would play the Crash Test Dummies. And anyone that remembers the Crash Test Dummies from the late 80s and early 90s knows that they sing really low. In fact, Brad Roberts said that he used to write his own music because no one wrote music in such a low octave. And so when Tom would play the Crash Test Dummies, we knew that he was kind of in a dark and depressed state. So my question for you is, what is your song? What is the music that touches you? What do you turn to when you are facing the clouds of your journey? Or you're sitting in a room that feels like a prison cell. Maybe it's the music you turn to when you just feel like you're kind of stuck. Or you are in between some difficult decisions. You find your family and friends want you to make a choice about something. Or maybe it's a song that just kind of gives you a little pep in those times when you need something extra. What is your song? I believe that each one of us has a song that we turn to. It might be a song that we turn to in our dark days. It might be a song that we turn to exercise. It might be a song that we hum when we're idle. Each one of us has that one particular song. In the deepest, darkest moments, it's that song that we turn to. As I was working on this message, I thought of my song. It was a song that was sung at my great-grandma's funeral. It was a song that I taught my daughters when they were little and they were about ready to go to sleep. It's a song that I requested to be sung at my memorial service. And it's a song that I always have sung whenever it's my last time to preach at a church. It's a song that touches me. Even to this day, it still gives me goosebumps, kind of a chill. And I've been known to shed a tear or two when we sing this song. It is Amazing Grace. And I don't think I will ever hear Amazing Grace enough. It is a powerful message about forgiveness, about starting over. And when I think of what is at the basis of my core theology, it is this. God loves me, and there's nothing I can do about it. Even those times that I don't say enough, even those times I don't do enough, even those times that I say too much, or those times that I do something, God has given me grace. God loves me so. It is a powerful message. So my question again for you is, what is your song? As you think about that, we're going to hear from Thomas Hall. Now, it's been a while, I realize that. Since we last heard from the blog entries of Thomas, we've talked about the Messianic secret. We have mentioned our favorite movie quotes. We have raised a bunch of money for the Clean Water Project in Africa. And we've had a lot happen in this church since last summer. Now today, we're going to pick up where we left off. And one of the things we're going to find in this blog entry is Thomas is just leaving Kansas. So look at this map here. And he's about ready to enter into Perryton, Texas, right here. Now his goal has always been Del Rio, Texas. So we're going to have a map that kind of takes him along all the journeys here. But to be listening here, because he's going to be going through this part, which is Kansas, the Oklahoma Panhandle, and just what is referred to as the border town of Texas. I was restive and unsettled as I prepared to leave Liberal to head toward the border town of Perryton, Texas. The residual high winds and accompanying thunderstorms, with their common occurrence of fingered lightning and tornadoes, worried me. I'd even considered bagging the rest of the tour rather than risk getting caught in a severe thunderstorm. I am vulnerable once I get out there, I kept thinking to myself. Not much between Liberal and Perryton. Sagebrush, a few irrigated fields, rolling hills, and isolated unmanned oil pumps. I decided to push off and attempt to get to Perryton, about 45 miles away. 10 miles into the run, the clouds became menacingly dark. The winds had picked up velocity, holding me down to between 5 to 7 miles an hour. Not much speed when you're wedged between thunderstorm formations. I recalled what I read about thunderstorms the night before. 1, put on rubber boots. 2, stay at home. 3, don't get near your cell phone. 28 people a year are killed while talking on their cell phone when lightning strikes nearby. And 4, don't get on a plane. These fail-safe instructions didn't exactly warm the cockles of my heart. Stay at home, right. I suppose sitting on a metal bike would have been the 5th no-no. I did what you'd probably do. I prayed and committed myself and the trip to God's larger vision, hoping, of course, that the larger vision would require me surviving the thunderstorm. But if not, well, I wasn't afraid to die. Then I did what some of you do when you face your own storms. I sang. I'm not the first to do that. Remember Silas and Paul? They were caught in the maelstrom of their own storm at the hands of angry magistrates in Philippi. They got thrown into prison with their backs and probably heads cracked open. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Acts 16:25. How amazing is that? So I kept singing that old abolitionist song over and over. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Twas grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Wasn't sure which home grace was going to lead me, but the word strangely calmed me down and gave me hope. I stopped looking for funnels that might suddenly appear and nose earthward. Instead, I began to focus on moving forward against the wind. The intensity of the wind eventually pushed the thunderclouds northward and past me. Relieved, I soon passed beyond the Oklahoma border and into Texas. Though the wind never let up, I was glad to face the resistance without the dark clouds. At day's end, I had pedaled about 50 miles, crossed from Kansas into the Oklahoma Panhandle, and into my final U.S. state, Texas. Woo-hoo, he says. So, well, it's been a while, so let's do a little refresher. Thomas Hall is a United Methodist pastor who lives in Montana. One summer, he decided to make a trip, and we don't have Montana on this map, but all the way from Montana, all the way through Texas on a recumbent bike. And on his journey, he came through Chadron, where I was pastoring at. Now, when I was there, he met me, he met my family, and as he left off, he says, "Why don't you follow my blog?" And so that's what we did, and that's what you are doing. We are following his blog entries. And we had to pause a little bit to go over some sermon material, but today we're back at it. And today it's a message that really spoke to me. That song. The power of song to get us through anything. I'll tell you, that's palatable. Now, maybe if you haven't been humming the song yet, I have a hunch that you might be after the end of today's message. But we're going to turn to verse 1 and sing Amazing Grace. There's a story that goes just outside the gates of heaven. One enters into what is known as the Supreme Court. Now, before you go into the Supreme Court, you have to go into a dressing room. And this dressing room is full of mirrors and allows the opportunity for the candidates to get ready for the most important interview of eternity. And as the story goes, there was one good and devout woman that entered into this dressing room. And she looked in the mirrors and she made sure that her hair was fine and that her makeup was fine. And then she opened up her casket suitcase and she pulled out her choir robe because she sang in the choir every Sunday. And then she reached in and she pulled out the medals that she had for good conduct. There was the one for piety. There was the one for the clothing drive. Now, it didn't matter that the clothes were out of date and were worn out, but at least she gave to the clothing drive. And then there was the medal that she gave to the poor, at least at Christmas time. What was missing was the 11 other months of the year where she thought the poor were lazy and should not be on welfare and could get a job, but that didn't matter because as she looked in the mirror, everything was perfect. She was proud of her choir robe. She was proud of her good conduct medals. And then she reached into her pocket. She pulled out a rosary. She prayed all the time. And then she put on rouge on her face to represent the thousands upon thousands of vigil candles that she lit throughout her years. And then she pulled up the robe to show the calluses on her knees, the times that she sat in prayer in devotion to God. Everything was perfect. And the angel said, "Next." And she was ready to walk into the Supreme Court where it was full of angels and saints, and they all looked at her and they began to boo. They began to hoot. They began to throw rotten tomatoes and rotten onions and rotten potatoes at her. And they began to say, "Shame! Shame!" She began to cry. And she ran out of the room. As she ran out of the room, she went by another woman. Now, this woman was a sinner. She never went to, well, hardly. She never prayed unless there was a crisis at hand. She was guilty of some petty sins, but also some major ones as well. And when she opened up her casket suitcase, it was empty. And as she stood in front of the mirror, she was absolutely naked, and her face began to get very red for embarrassment. The angel came in and said, next. And she pleaded with the angel that she should not go. And it didn't matter. She looked at the angel. She says, please have mercy on me. I am a sinner. I am ashamed to appear before the saints. I am not worthy to be here. Didn't matter. The angel kind of pushed her into the Supreme Court. And there she stood naked in front of all the saints and all the angels. And they all stood up. And they applauded. And then they pointed to a sign that said, go this way. And as she approached the doorway to heaven, she noticed it was only about 4 feet high. And there was another sign that said, servant's entrance, appropriate dress required. Let us sing verse 2 of Amazing Grace. This verse are so telling. My fears relieved. To me, that's freeing. That reminds me that God is so close, so present, so active in my life. Now, I'm not talking about a God that puts down a hand and says, Seth, don't go this way. I don't believe in a kind of God like that. I think we can mess up just fine on our own. This is a song that supports us, that moves us, that really grabs us to the core. A song much like prayer that allows us, that makes us communicate with God. Brandon Manning tells a story about a man who was dying of cancer. And his daughter called up a pastor to come and pray with her dad. And so when the pastor arrived, he noticed the man was sitting up in his bed with pillows propped around, and he noticed that there was an empty chair sitting right next to the bed. And he assumed that the man knew that he was coming. And so the pastor said, I guess you were expecting me. And the man says, no, who are you? And the pastor said who his name was and that his daughter called him up to pray for him. And then the pastor said, well, I saw the empty chair, and I figured that you knew I was going to be arriving. Oh, yes, the chair, said the man. Would you mind closing the door? A bit puzzled, the pastor got and closed the door. And he looked at the man in the bed, and the man said, I've never told anyone this, not even my daughter. But all my life, I never knew how to pray. At church, I used to hear the priest talk about prayer, but it just went right over my head. I abandoned any attempt at prayer until one day, about 4 years ago, my best friend said to me, Joe, prayer is just a simple matter of having a conversation with Jesus. Here's what I suggest. Sit down in a chair, place an empty chair in front of you, and in faith, see Jesus in the chair. It's not spooky because he promised, I'll be with you always. Then just speak to him in the same way you're doing with me right now. So, Pastor, I tried it, and I liked it so much that I do it a couple hours every day. I'm careful, though, if my daughter saw me talking to an empty chair, she would either have a nervous breakdown or send me off to the funny farm. The pastor was deeply moved by this story and encouraged the man to continue on this journey. Then the pastor prayed for the man, anointed him with oil, and went on to the church office. About 2 days later, the man's daughter called the pastor up to say that the man, her father, had died. And then the pastor asked, did he die in peace? And the daughter said, yes, when I left the house about 2 o'clock, he called me over to his bedside, told me he loved me, and kissed me on the cheek. When I got back from the store an hour later, I found him dead. But there was something strange about his death. Apparently, just before Dad died, he leaned over and rested his head in the chair beside the bed. What do you make of that? And the pastor kind of wiped a tear off of his eye and said, I wish we could all go like that. Let's sing verse 3 of Amazing Grace. Home. When you think of that image, what does it conjure up? Family, friends, a long time ago, innocence, community, peace, security, rest. You know, John Newton wrote these words to say that God brought him home. Brought him back to a God who said, John, I love you. No matter your past, no matter that you were a slave trader, I forgive you. I bring you home. Now, John, go do something about it. And if you know the story of John Newton, you know that he became very active to eliminate the slave trade in Britain. When you are facing the clouds of your journey, what do you think of? Running away, hiding, finding shelter, standing and fighting? What do you think of home? Do you think of your soul? Are you ready to sit? And I mean sit and just be in God's presence and really feel it. Now, I can assure you it's hard to do. I know I've been there. It's gut-wrenching. It's a leap of faith. But it's a moment of home. It's a God moment. And a God moment is that time when we commit ourselves to God's greater vision. A moment when that song comes to us and we realize even God saves a wretch like me. In his short story, The Capital of the World, Ernest Hemingway tells the story about a Spanish father and a son that had a very strained relationship. Well, eventually that relationship was shattered. And when the rebellious son, who was named Paco, which is a very common name in Spain, finally ran away from home, the dad looked all over the country for his son, to no avail. Finally, the exhausted father put an ad in the Madrid newspaper, hoping that his son would read it and would respond to it. Now, the ad was very simple. It just read, Dear Paco, please meet me in front of the newspaper office at noon. All is forgiven. Love, your father. As Hemingway tells it, the next day at noon, in front of that newspaper office, there were 800 Pacos waiting to receive forgiveness from their dad. We're going to sing again verse 1 of Amazing Grace. I'm going to turn it over to the ushers as we give back to God.